Hey everyone. So, when you hear the phrase populist foreign policy, what immediately pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably things like, closed borders, heavy protectionism, this idea of a country just going it alone. But what if I told you that's just one chapter of a much bigger, more complicated story? Well, today we're going to dig into that story and see what's really going on.
So let's just start with the big question right up front. Is there really only one kind of populist foreign policy? Well, the short answer is absolutely not. But the long answer, the reason why, that's where things get really interesting. It turns out populism is way more of a chameleon than we usually think.
You know that common picture we all have? Nationalist, anti-immigration, isolationist. That's the one we see in the headlines all the time. But here's the thing. That picture is totally incomplete. It's kind of like looking at a single slice of pepperoni and thinking you understand the entire world of pizza. The reality is, there are a lot more flavors out there.
Okay, so to really understand all these different flavors, we have to get right down to the very core of what populism even is. See, it's not a complete, detailed worldview like, say, socialism or liberalism. Instead, political scientists have this great term for it. It's an ideology with attachments. Let's break down what that actually means.
At its absolute heart, populism is incredibly simple. It's a way of looking at the world that basically splits society into two groups that are always in conflict. On one side, you have the pure, ordinary people. And on the other, a corrupt, self-serving elite. And that's it. Seriously, that's the fundamental idea. Everything a populist does or says gets filtered through this one central struggle.
And because that core idea is so basic, populism is called a thin-centered ideology. Think of it like a plain white t-shirt. It has a shape, sure, but to really say something, you have to print a slogan or a logo on it, right? Well, populism is that plain t-shirt. To come up with actual policies on the economy or foreign relations, it has to attach itself to a thicker, more detailed host ideology, like nationalism or market liberalism or even socialism.
And this is such a crucial distinction, one that a lot of people miss. We often mix up populism and nationalism, but their focus is completely different. Populism is all about a vertical conflict, the people down here versus the elite up there. Nationalism, on the other hand, is about the horizontal community, who gets to be in the nation. That's why you can totally have something called elitist nationalism, the idea that the nation should be led by its best and brightest. But elitist populism? No way. That's a complete contradiction in terms.
So you might be wondering, why did this people versus elite message get so powerful over the last few decades? Well, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. A few massive global shifts happened that basically created the perfect storm for this kind of politics to really take off. It was this crazy combination of three huge transformations. First, the Cold War ends. All of a sudden, that big external enemy that defined politics for 50 years is gone. So people start looking inward, a lot more critically at their own domestic elites. Second, globalization just explodes. This brought huge benefits for some, but it also left a lot of people feeling vulnerable and left behind, like their national governments couldn't protect them anymore. And third, you have bodies like the European Union getting more and more powerful, which created this new, distant, and what felt like a totally unaccountable elite for populists to point their fingers at. Together, these three things created a political vacuum that populists were just perfectly positioned to step into.
So if populism is the plain t-shirt, what are the different slogans people print on it? This brings us to the real heart of our explainer today. We can actually sort populism into these different flavors based on which host ideology it latches onto. And trust me, understanding these flavors is the key to seeing why their foreign policies can be so radically different from one another.
All right, so based on the source material, we can break it down into four main types you'll see out there in the world: the populist radical right, the populist market liberal, the populist regionalist, and the populist left wing. And what makes them different is that each one has a totally different idea of who counts as the people, and just as importantly, who counts as the elite.
So let's start with the populist radical right. You see this with parties like France's National Front. For them, the pure people are defined by shared culture and ethnicity. It's a nativist thing. And the elite? Well, the elite are the people, both at home and abroad, who they see as threatening that national identity, whether through immigration or ideas like multiculturalism.
Now, switch gears to the market liberal type, like what we saw with Berlusconi's movement in Italy. For them, it's a completely different story. The pure people are the honest, hardworking citizens, the entrepreneurs. So who's the elite enemy? It's the government.
It's the big, clunky, bureaucratic state that crushes the free market with high taxes and endless regulations.
Then you've got the populist regionalist, which narrows the focus even more. A great example is Italy's Northern League back in its early days. For them, the pure people aren't the whole nation, but just the folks from one specific, often more prosperous region. And the corrupt elite? That's the central government, way off in the capital city, who they believe is just ignoring their needs and stealing their money.
And finally, there's the populist left wing. Think of parties like Podemos in Spain or the movements led by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Here, the pure people are defined by economic class. It's the working class, the exploited class. And the elite can be their own country's establishment for sure, but very often the enemy is transnational. You're talking global banks, huge multinational corporations, or powerful foreign governments.
Okay, so we have our 4 distinct flavors. Now, for the payoff. Let's put this framework to the test and see how these totally different definitions of the people and the elite lead to completely different positions on some of the biggest foreign policy debates of our time. This is where it gets really good.
And boom! This is where it all clicks into place. Just look at this. Take migration. The radical right is fiercely opposed, right? Because they see immigrants as a threat to their cultural definition of the people. But the populist left? Often they're not opposed at all, because their definition of the people is a global working class, not a single nation. Now let's look at trade. This is fascinating. Both the radical right and the left can be super protectionist, but for totally opposite reasons. The right wants to protect the national identity. The left wants to protect workers from what they see as global capitalism. And meanwhile, the market liberal absolutely loves open trade and regional groups like the EU. Why? Because it expands the free market. See? It all goes back to the host ideology. It dictates everything.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that there is no single monolithic populist foreign policy. It just doesn't exist. Global issues like migration, trade, or international agreements, for a populist, these aren't just policies. They are a menu of potential enemies. The core strategy is always the same. Pick an elite, define them as the enemy of the people, and then rally everyone against them. The specific target changes, and when it does, the policy changes with it.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. This style of politics is all about defining a them to rally an us against. So as our world keeps changing and we face new global challenges, things like AI, climate change, massive shifts in global power, we have to ask ourselves, who is going to be cast as the next corrupt elite? Because the answer to that question, well, that's what's going to shape the foreign policy of tomorrow.